Oh, thank you.
I enjoyed it tremendously.
Thanks.
I learned a lot. But I always have a lot to learn. So.
Okay. Where's our chevra? Is everybody here? I'm just seeing it. All right. Okay, good morning, everybody. Why don't we get started? Um, so, we learned yesterday when it comes to measuring and weighing things is that even the smallest error, even the smallest deviation from accuracy is considered to be an Isser Deoraisa, and it's even called a Toeva. It's called an abomination. And the next sif in the Rav Shulchan Aruch is as follows: Va'afilu hashokel o hamoded bechaser kolshehu lenachri over below sasa. This is true even if you weigh or measure something deficient in a deficient way to a non-Jew. You violate this negative commandment. V'chayev lahachzir, and you have to make restitution even for a small amount. The biurim in the commentary on the side deliberates whether chayiv lahachzir means even less than a shava pruta, or is it only if it's a shava pruta. Um, but the point is that normally there are other financial halachos where even though it's usher to a goy, but b'di'eved, for example, if a person steals, b'di'eved, there are certain circumstances where you're putter from paying back to a non-Jew that where who was the object of gezela. But when it comes to false weights and measures, we're even more machmir than we are by theft. Okay, uchamosha aser lahatoso becheshbon. Just like it's aser, as we had learned in the previous chapter, that you're not allowed to deceive a non-Jew by telling him the wrong amount of money. Shenemar v'chishavim konehu v'gomer, as it says that you have to make a cheshbon with the person with whom you're making a transaction. V'harehu bichlal ki so'avas Hashem elokecha kol osei eile kol osei avel, that it is an abomination before God anyone who does any of these things, anyone who commits a perverse act. Now, where is that from? So yesterday we learned from a pasuk in Vayikra, right? But there's also a pasuk that we had a bit more recently at the end of Parshas Kitetse, having to do with also having to do with false weights and measures. The Torah says right before the laws of Amalek, the Torah says Lo yihiya lecha. This is at the end of Parshas Kitetse, chapter 25. Lo yihiya lecha bechisecha even va'aven gedola uktana. You may not have in your satchel two different standards of weights, a large standard and a small standard, because that's used for deception. Lo yihiya lecha efa ve'efa gedola uktana. You may not have in your home two different kinds of efa weights, which is just a measurement, one smaller and one larger. Evan shalem of yelach, you must have a complete and accurate stone, weight stone. Efa shalem of yelach, you must have a complete and righteous or accurate measure. Leman yarichu yamecha al ha'adama asher Hashem Elokecha nosen lach, so that your days may be prolonged on the earth upon which you live, meaning that you'll be able to remain in Eretz Yisrael. And then it's our pasuk that the Rav Shulchan Aruch presents here: Ki so avas Hashem Elokecha kol osei eile, kol osei avel, because it is an abomination to Hashem anyone who does any of these things, anyone who does something which is corrupt. Okay, so I mean, sometimes we forget about the basic text of the Chumash because we're so concerned about the minutia halachic observance, and we don't realize that right in front of our eyes are the things that we as a Jewish community sometimes do wrong, because we think business is business, religion is religion, business is business. The two have nothing to do with each other. But of course, that's why we're learning this stuff. So anyway, so why is the verse so wordy? If you do any of these things, if you do any of these perversions, it's repetitious. It's to tell me that even if I do these to a non-Jew, I am committing something perverse and prohibited. Ve'eno dome la'ona'a shuhu ro'eh ma shekona v'toa me'atzmo b'shivui hamekach. And Paul had asked, there's a lot of overlap between last chapter and this chapter, is because ona'ah and false weights, there is a lot of similarity, right? Because what you're doing is you're deceiving a person, but here we're creating a contrast. Why is ona'ah permitted to a Gentile? What did we say by ona'as mamon? We said you can charge whatever you want, even if it's over a sixth more than fair market value. A person can see, this is the merchandise, this is my asking price. If you want to do your due diligence and you want to be able to discover fair market price, so I have no obligations to you. That's caveat emptor. That's what we say to a non-Jew. If he wants to come into my store and buy my merchandise, I can charge whatever I like, even though he can get it much more cheaply somewhere else. There's only a special halacha to my fellow Jew, because he's my brother in a sense, that I have an obligation to not exploit him financially. But a Gentile, if I want to exploit him financially because of his ignorance, that I can do at my discretion. There's no biblical prohibition, at least unless there's going to be a chilul Hashem, of course, and we've gone through all of those halachas already. But he says the reason why false weights and measures is even more stringent, in that it applies equally to both Jews and non-Jews, is because there's no self-deception on behalf of the consumer. I'm doing all of the deceiving. I'm misrepresenting the product flagrantly and blatantly by telling him it's 5 pounds when really it's 4.5 pounds. And that's the reason why I'm completely at fault. I'm completely in violation of the Torah. V'ta'usa muteris ka'avedaso. And just like there's no obligation when it comes to a Gentile to correct his self-deception, there's no obligation for me to return his lost items, right? Because that's a special chesed that the Torah only obligates me to do for a Jew. Avol zeh mat'ehu v'gonev mamashu. But in our scenario, I'm the one who's doing all of the deceptive practice. It's not because of his ignorance. It's not because of any other factors. I'm the criminal here, and I'm mamish aganav. I'm mamish stealing. Okay, so there's not a lot of Imrei Yaakov over here, so we can just go to the next seif. But it's pretty explicit. Okay, next halacha, Gimel.
Just one quick question, Rabbi.
Yeah, sure, Paul.
Just trying to think of it's hard to think of practical applications because we don't really weigh things out as much. Sometimes you buy products and they're not fully labeled. They don't include all the ingredients that they're meant to. And I know big manufacturers probably have lots of government standards they have to meet, but sometimes you'll buy some delicatessen item that has oil. You know it has oil, but oil's not listed on the ingredients. That's the same kind of thing where the consumer can't tell what's in there. It's not really weighing, but it's the same kind of thing where the purchaser's at a disadvantage because they can't make their own judgments. They're reliant on the supplier. Any relationship
Yeah,
of that?
I'm not sure. I can tell you a comparable example. There are things called fillers that people put into food. And the government has regulations about percentages of fillers that you're allowed to put into food. For a short time, many years ago, I worked in the food distribution industry, and there was a restaurant supply company that I worked for, And I learned a lot about some of these things. Like for example, did you know that there's a certain water content that ground beef is allowed to have, and the way that they can cut costs in selling ground beef is that sometimes they grind in crushed ice into the ground beef, or at least this was the practice, in order to be able to sell you a larger amount for less money, because there's less beef in there. That's the old joke that at the McDonald's conference after they sold their 1 millionth burger, they said, "Finally, we sold our first pound of meat." So
Or the Wendy's commercial about where's the beef?
you're right. Where's the beef? Exactly. So uh, the point is that the government is aware of these things, and the government says we will tolerate a certain amount of filler, whether it's fat or whether it's water or these kinds of things. And so, therefore, once a government standard has been established, as long as a person abides by the standards that the government places for these kinds of things, then he's certainly within his rights, because that becomes accepted, and that becomes what the definition of hamburger meat is, or chopped meat is that it's beef with a certain amount of liquid added to it, or and so forth. So, but I'm sure we'll get a chance to see some of these things as we continue on over
Yeah,
the.
the example I'm thinking, I bought a kugel before and it doesn't list oil on the ingredients, and it's hard to believe that there's no oil in the kugel. Um, but so I'm just thinking, is there a deception there that that's comparable to weighing because of that relative relationship between the purchaser
Well,
and the seller?
I don't know. I guess it depends on what the expectation of the consumer is. I'll tell you, in today's world, not putting an ingredient on a package could open you up to a huge lawsuit. Let's say has an allergy, and you don't list an ingredient, and that person it goes into anaphylactic shock, because they ate something that they're allergic to. That could be actually quite dangerous. So there are many reasons, probably legally, that a seller has, when he packages a good, has to put the ingredients on. So um, I don't know, but I'm sure we'll see some more examples as we go along. Um, okay, Gimel. Kol mi shemasha bevesa o bechanuso mida chasera o mishkal chaser over below saf. So we had made reference to this yesterday. Even having in your home or in your store a deficient weight or measure, even if you don't use it, you are still in violation of the Torah. There's a specific mitzvah lo say not to even allow you to have it in your possession. Shenemar lo yihi ala bechischa even va'avin gedola uktana lo yihi lecha beveischa efa ve'efa gedola uktana. You may not have in your pouch or your satchel two different weights, one large and one small, and you may not have in your house two different ephah measuring cups, one large and one small. And the way that the Rav Shulchan Aruch understands the repetition in this pasuk is that the Torah is coming to tell you neither professionally nor even domestically. In other words, don't think that this prohibition just applies to having this in your workplace. It applies even having it in your home, where you don't even plan to do anything for mercantile exchange. You still can't have faulty weights and measures in your house. So we're going to see a qualification for that in just a minute. But let's first finish up. Vafilu la'asos hamida avit shalmei raglayim aser. Even to take, let's say, a faulty, let's say, graduated cylinder or graduated container, and it's not marked correctly. So I say, okay, I'm not going to use it for measuring things. Let me use it as a urinal, right? He says even that is prohibited. Shema yavo misha ena yodeya shehi chasera v'yimdod ba, because some guy may come along and pick up the urinal at a yard sale, or whatever. He may come and clean out your house, and he says, hey, do you need this urinal anymore? You say, no, I'm finished, and he'll come and take it, and then he'll end up using it for some nefarious purpose. Ve'im minhag ha'ir shalol, but then the Rav Shulchan Aruch qualifies it. He says, ve'im minhag ha'ir shelo limdod ela b'mida harashuma berosham hayadua v'zu ena rashuma mutter lahashosa. If, however, the custom of the city is only to measure with a scale or a measuring cup that is especially marked with a government insignia, right? And this container is not marked, so then you're allowed to keep it in your house. In other words, if the government regulation is that whenever you're measuring something, there has to be a seal of approval from the government, like most digital scales today have some kind of sticker on them indicating that it's been fully calibrated by the Department of Weights and Measures, or what is there something like that in Canada? I know there is in the U.S. I'm sure there's got to be something like that in Canada too. So if your scale or your weight doesn't have that marking on it, so then according to the Rav Shulchan Aruch, you are allowed to keep it in your house because there's no danger of it being used for nefarious purposes. Okay, and so therefore this leads the Imrei Yaakov to state as follows: Mida chasera, v'hu adin yasera. And even if it's a larger weight, you're also not allowed to keep it because sometimes, when you're selling things, you always want to keep your weights smaller than they really are so that you can deceive the buyer. So what you might argue, well, let me make the weight larger. What could possibly go wrong? Well, the answer is it to purchase things, right? So you can't have anything that's faulty, neither to your advantage or to the other person's advantage. V'yesh omrim de iser shihoi mida chasera lo ne'asar ela b'ma she'asoi limdod bo b'shum pam derech mekachu memkar. He says, and there are opinions who say that the only kind of weights and measures that are prohibited are those that are used conventionally for mercantile exchange. Ma she'ein ken keshemachzik beveso mishkola she'asoi rak limdod u'l'shayr tavshilov. But let's say you have a weight or a scale in your home, or a measuring cup that's only meant for home use. Okay, it's meant for when you're cooking in your kitchen, you have a measuring cup or some other kind of graduated container or some kind of kitchen scale that it's clearly meant for domestic use. You can buy these for people who go on diets. And they weigh everything. So you buy a home kitchen scale. You can buy it for $10, and it's very cheaply made, and it's usually not calibrated with complete accuracy. He says, "V'hamida hirak b'kiruv de'ein lesor." He says it's not carefully calibrated; it's only approximate. He says then there's no prohibition. V'chein noagim lahachzik b'vayis moznaimu mishkolos sheim yuchadim avor tzarchei habayis v'lo asuim klal avor mischar. And therefore that's our practice today. We do that with kitchen scales, bathroom scales, right? We're not careful to calibrate them, thank God, because we're not going to start selling things off of a bathroom scale, right? V'chein bakbukim shel tinokos shemesuman aleim shiurei midos v'lefamim eno meduyakim. And similarly, let's say you have a children's, like a baby's bottle, which is many times is graduated, right, on the side. And it's not always completely accurate because, it's made in China or whatever it is, and so they stamp the graduation on the side of the bottle. It's not 100% accurate, but mikol makom shari lahachzikan. But you're still allowed to have those things in your home, hol ve'enam yu'adam lishtamish behem letzarach mischar u'mechir, because it's clear that they can't be used for mercantile purposes. Okay, and therefore that's what the Rav Shulchan Aruch was referring to at the end of the Sif when he said if the government requires a certain kind of stamp or sticker or to say that this is approved by the government and yours doesn't have it, so then you're allowed to keep it in your home. Okay, and then the Imrei Yaakov says in Tes Zayin, he says, Avit v'chulei asur, you're not allowed to have, even if you turned it into a urinal, you're not allowed to keep it in your house if it's faulty. Yesh omrim tuhu rak midirabanan, dahalo sa'asuhu rak imasha kedei l'ramos. There are opinions who say that this is only rabbinic law, that you're not allowed to keep it in your house if it's not being used as a measuring instrument. because according to some opinions, the only time that the Torah prohibits you from keeping a false weight or measure in your home is if you have the plan is to use it for deceptive purposes. Va'af she'ein marama over al hashia, and therefore what the Torah is saying is that even if you're currently not actively using it for deceptive reasons, but if your objective is to use it for deceptive purposes, you're over on the Isser. Aval b'masha shelo l'ramos rak osa avichol meraglayim uchedome ina over below sasa rak midrabanan aser shema yiramebo. Right, but if you've already turned this graduated bucket into a urinal, so then it's only rabbinically prohibited. It's not biblically prohibited. Umei halacha zu lamadnu. Right, he says, but from this halacha at least we can learn the following: that if you, let's say you are a merchant and you have a scale in your shop, and you discover that your scale is faulty, so you don't want to use it until it gets fixed. And so you're waiting for the repairman, the guy who works for the scale company. He's going to come and he's going to recalibrate your scale. That as long as you put a big X on it, you tape over a big sign that says out of order, or something like that. So then it's okay. Then it's permissible for you to keep that scale in your shop, because as long as you indicate very, very clearly that it's out of order or it's broken or whatever it is, so then you'll prevent people from using it. So that's an important caveat, as that you are allowed to keep it as long as you're waiting to get it repaired or something like that, and you mark it in the interim. Okay. The next halacha is not consistent with our times. It just is quoting from the Gemara what kinds of weights and measures you are supposed to have, because there are certain standards from the times of the Gemara. So the next halacha, he just talks about the different sizes, sa'ah and chatzi sa'ah, and a quarter sa'ah, and a kav, and a half a kav, and a quarter of a kav. These are all standard measuring amounts that a person is supposed to have in his store if he's selling dry goods. And if he's selling liquid goods, you're supposed to have a certain amount of standard measuring cups so that you can provide the customer for his needs. Okay. In halacha hey, and basically what you learn from that halacha is that you have to be able to provide a customer with a variety of choices of amounts. You shouldn't say when you're selling dry goods or liquid goods, well, we only sell it by this exorbitant amount. If you're selling consumer goods, you're supposed to try and accommodate different measuring amounts for the customer. And that's when people would bring their own utensils, and you would measure out for them the dry goods or the liquid goods and pour it into their containers. Okay, hey. Mitzarech lahashos hamida hafuch al kli halokeach achar shenifsak mimenu hakiloach ad shiatifu mimenu gimel tipin. What you also have to do is that, let's say you're pouring out liquid goods, wine or oil is the typical example, and you're pouring the amount from your measuring container into the customer's bucket, or whatever container he brings with him. So you have to make sure that you hold the measuring cup over his container for a few seconds, so that the stream of liquid starts to drip. You can't be quick. You have to wait until you empty out all of the contents of the measuring cup. So achar shenifsak mimenu hakiluach ad shiatifu mimenu gimel tipin. So the stream has to stop, and as long as 3 distinct drops fall out of the measuring cup, then you can stop. Bameh dvarim amurim, bebalabayas hamocher liprakim. And this is true only for a balabayas, meaning a person who's not a professional, who sells only periodically. Aval chen v'nishu mocher tadir ve'en lo penai lishos, lo hitrichuhu chachamim lahatif klum. But if he's a busy merchant in a store, so then you don't have to wait that amount of time. You don't have to have any drops come off. You just have to wait until the stream stops. He says, and let's say you want to be machmir, I'm a merchant, and I feel bad because every time I measure out, let's say, a quart of my wine or my oil to my customers, I'm so busy I don't have time to wait there until every single drop comes out, and I have to go to the next customer. But I feel bad because I'm accumulating drops of liquid that I'm not giving out to my customers. So what should I do? Even though the consumer generally is forgiving of that, and since consumers are forgiving, there's really no geneva involved. So what should you do if you still feel bad? Yaset sorche rabim imasha hu she yitosar lo bechavis al sikum hamidos shahotzi mimena machmas hanisha lo bedofne kol mida umida. Then you should approximate how much of this liquid that I generally sell have I accumulated over the course of a week or a month or a year. Calculate approximately how much money that accumulation is worth, and use that for public communal needs. So let's say there's a mikveh in town, or let's say there's a community center, or let's say there's roads or sanitation works that you can help improve. So you should take that money that you've accumulated over the course of the year by accumulating a few drops in it for every customer, and use that money to do for the community's needs. And that way you're giving back to your customers in a way that can be shared by them all. Okay? And that's generally what we say to a person when he wants to make restitution for something for some ill-gotten gains, and he has no way of knowing whom he's taken the money from. We tell him, even though it's not a complete method of making restitution, but you can use that money from those ill-gotten gains and contribute to the public works of the community. And that way, invariably, the people that you've exploited illegally will at least benefit in some way from your restitution to the community's needs. Okay, but over here, we're saying the same argument. Here, you've done nothing wrong, because since the standard when you go to a store is not to wait for the merchant to stand there for those extra several seconds or even a minute, waiting for all of the liquid to pour out of the container. He doesn't have time. He's got a line full of customers, a busy store. So then it's acceptable for you to do this method instead. Okay, and I think this is where we'll hold it for today. Questions, comments? If not, everyone should have a great day.
Sure.
Take care.
Okay, gentlemen, be well.
Thank you.